I have been a judge for 38 years. I have seen things in this courtroom that no file could ever fully contain. I have watched guilty men walk free and innocent men carry sentences that outlasted their hope. I have learned, slowly, at great personal cost, that the law and justice are not always the same thing. That sometimes the most important question a judge can ask has nothing to do with what is written in the statute. But in 38 years, I had never stopped walking in my own hallway because of something a child said. She was 3 years old. She was holding a stuffed rabbit missing one eye. And the question she asked, in that small, certain voice that only children have, the voice that doesn't know yet that some questions are too heavy to say out loud. That question followed me through the door and sat beside me on the bench and refused to leave for the entire duration of that hearing. The man standing at my defendant's stand had committed 2 infractions. The file was clean. The charges were documented. The prosecuting attorney was prepared. Every procedural mechanism in that courtroom was pointed in one direction. And then I took off my glasses, and I asked him why. What he told me next silenced the entire room. Because there was something the file didn't say, something the arresting officer's report couldn't capture, something that existed in the space between 11:30 at night and $17 in a bank account and a woman unconscious on a bathroom floor. And when it came out, it didn't just change the case, it changed the room. And if you stay until the end of this story, I promise you it will change something in you too. I need you to hear this from the beginning. Before we start, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. If stories about justice, empathy, and hidden truths move you the way they move me, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Every single case we share here is a reminder that behind every file, there is a human being. Now, let me tell you about a Monday morning in January, and a little girl's question that broke an entire courtroom's heart. There are cases I remember not because of what was written in the file. I remember them because of what was said in the hallway before the doors even opened. I had been a judge for 38 years when Marcus Reed walked into my courtroom. 38 years of files, of names, of faces that blurred together after the 1,000th Monday morning. 38 years of learning, slowly, painfully, the way you only learn things that cost you something. That the law is an instrument, not a destination. That the law on its own has no heart. It measures, it calculates, it weighs infractions on a scale that was never designed to account for the specific gravity of a father's fear at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. I learned that lesson the hard way. Most important lessons arrive that way. I had a son. His name is not something I will say out loud in this story, because some names belong only to the inside of your chest. He was 31 years old, the father of 2 small children, the most responsible human being I had ever known in my life. I lost him in a car accident 12 years ago on a Wednesday afternoon in November, on a stretch of highway so ordinary it seemed impossible that something so permanent could happen there. After that, I stopped seeing defendants. I started seeing people. That Monday morning was the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself loudly. It wasn't the dramatic cold of a blizzard, nothing cinematic about it. It was the quiet, persistent cold of a gray January morning that settles into the courthouse marble overnight and stays there, indifferent, all day. The kind of cold that makes the wooden benches feel harder than they are. The kind that makes the fluorescent lights seem slightly yellower, slightly more tired than they would on a warmer day. I had arrived early, as I always did. The building had that particular silence that exists only before the public enters. A held breath kind of silence. The silence of a stage before the curtain rises. My clerk had left the morning's files stacked on my desk in precise order, the way she had done every morning for 11 years. I sat down, adjusted my glasses, and opened the first folder. Marcus Allen Reed, age 29, mechanic, no prior record. I read the charges. I read the arresting officer's report. I read the time of the incident, 11:47 p.m., And I noted, the way you note things after 38 years, that this was not the hour of recklessness. This was not the hour of a man looking for trouble. 11:47 p.m. was the hour of desperation. The hour when something has already gone wrong, and the only question left is how much worse it is going to get. I set the file down. I was still thinking about it when I heard the doors at the back of the courtroom open. I didn't look up immediately. I had learned long ago not to look up immediately, to give people the small mercy of a moment to collect themselves before a judge's eyes find them. But I heard it, the particular sound of someone walking into a room they never wanted to enter. Not the purposeful stride of an attorney, not the practiced pace of a repeat offender who has learned to perform composure. This was slower, more careful. The footsteps of a man acutely aware of every sound his shoes were making on the marble floor. I looked up. He was standing at the defendant's stand, with the specific stillness of someone who has told their body not to move, because movement might draw more attention, and attention right now feels dangerous. He was young in the way that made him look younger than 29, not in features, but in the rawness of his expression. The way his face hadn't yet learned to conceal what it was feeling. His shirt was white, or had been white once, buttoned all the way to the collar with the careful precision of a man who owned one good shirt and knew it. His hands were on the wooden stand, fingers laced together, and even from the bench I could see the marks on them, the deep, ingrained darkness in the lines of his knuckles that no amount of soap fully removes. The hands of someone who worked with them, who had always worked with them. His eyes were fixed on the floor, not the floor in front of him, a specific point on the floor approximately 2 feet ahead of his shoes, as if he had chosen it and decided it was safer than anything else in the room. And I thought, before a single word had been spoken, before the charges had been read aloud, before the machinery of the court had begun its cold procedural turning, I thought of the thing I had heard in the hallway 40 minutes earlier, through a door that had been left slightly ajar. A child's voice, small and clear and absolutely certain in the way that 3-year-olds are certain about everything, because they haven't yet learned that certainty is a luxury. Is my daddy going to heaven or jail? I had stopped walking when I heard it. I had stood in that corridor for 3 seconds with my hand not quite touching the door, and I had felt something move in my chest that I recognized but rarely named out loud. It was the specific ache of a question that is innocent on the surface and devastating underneath, because that little girl didn't know the difference between heaven and jail. She only knew that both of them meant the same thing. Daddy goes away. Daddy doesn't come back. I straightened my robe, I pushed open the door, and I walked into my courtroom carrying that question with me like something I intended to answer. The clerk read the charges at 8:53 in the morning. I watched Marcus Reed's face as she did it. There is something I have noticed over 38 years that no law school teaches and no manual prepares you for. The difference between the face of someone hearing their crimes read aloud and feeling nothing, and the face of someone hearing their crimes read aloud and feeling everything. The first face is practiced, flat. It has been in this room before, or rooms like it, and it has learned that expression costs you less than reaction. The second face cannot hide itself. It flinches at the words. It absorbs them the way skin absorbs cold water, visibly, involuntarily, with the particular wince of someone who already knows what they did and does not need to be reminded but is being reminded anyway. Marcus Reed had the second face. Driving with an expired license. Expired 14 months prior to the date of the incident. His jaw tightened. Trespassing on private property. Specifically forcing entry through a security barrier on the premises of Hargrove Industrial Storage, located at 4400 Meridian Avenue. His fingers, already laced together on the stand, pressed harder against each other. I could see the knuckles whiten from where I sat. Combined charges carrying a maximum penalty of 18 months probation, a fine not to exceed $4,200, and a permanent mark on the defendant's driving record. The clerk finished and sat down. The room was quiet for a moment, in the way that rooms are quiet after something heavy has been placed on a table. $4,200. I let that number sit in the air for a moment because numbers like that deserve to be heard properly, not as an abstraction, not as a figure on a document. $4,200 to a man who had $17 in his bank account on the night in question. I had read that in the arresting officer's supplemental notes, a detail so specific it could only have come from the man himself, offered without strategy or calculation, the way people offer true things when they are too exhausted to construct anything else. $4,200 was not a fine to Marcus Reed. It was a different kind of sentence entirely. It was the number that meant losing the apartment, pulling his daughter out of daycare, his wife working triple shifts on a body that had already given out once. It was the number that answered his daughter's question in the worst possible way. The prosecuting attorney stood and delivered her summary with the brisk efficiency of someone who had 3 more cases before lunch. She was not unkind. I want to be precise about that. She was doing her job, and her job on that morning was to present the facts of the case clearly and without embellishment. And she did exactly that. The facts were not in dispute. Marcus Reed had driven a vehicle with an expired license. Marcus Reed had forced a security barrier on private property. Both of these things were true and documented and photographed and signed by 2 officers and a property manager who had showed up at 6 in the morning with a clipboard and an expression of bureaucratic grievance. The facts were clean. The facts were also, as facts often are, almost entirely useless for understanding what had actually happened. I had seen it before. The way a case file can be perfectly accurate and completely wrong at the same time. Every word true, every word insufficient. The law asks what happened and whether it violated a statute. It is not required to ask why. It does not have to sit with the why, turn it over, hold it up to the light, and examine what it looks like from the other side. That is not what the law was built to do. But it is, I had decided somewhere around my 22nd year on the bench, exactly what a judge must do. The defense attorney, a young public defender who looked like he hadn't slept since Thursday and was doing his genuine best with the 40 minutes he'd had to review the file, stood and offered what he could. His client had no prior record. His client was a contributing member of his community. His client expressed deep remorse. He sat down. Remorse. I have heard that word used 10,000 times in this room, and I have learned to read the difference between remorse as performance and remorse as fact. Marcus Reed had not said a single word yet. He had stood at that podium through the reading of his charges and his attorney's brief summary and the prosecuting attorney's efficient presentation, and he had not looked up from that point on the floor except twice. Once when the dollar amount was read aloud, when his eyes closed for just a fraction of a second, and once when his attorney sat down, when he glanced toward the back of the room with an expression I recognized immediately. He was looking for his wife. He found her. Something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly, but the specific steadying that happens when a person in free fall locates something solid. She was in the first row, her hands folded over a cloth bag in her lap, and she gave him a single small nod that contained more language than most people use in an entire conversation. I'm here. I'm still here.
He turned back to the stand.
I removed my glasses.
I folded them slowly, the way I always did when I was about to stop being a judge for a moment and start being something closer to a human being in an official robe.
I placed them on the folder in front of me, and I looked at Marcus Allen Reed. Really looked at him. The way you look at someone when you have decided that the document in front of you is the least important thing in the room. And I asked him the only question that had ever mattered in any case I had ever presided over in 38 years. Not do you understand the charges, not how do you plead, not do you have anything to say in your defense. I asked him the question that the law is not required to ask, and that I had made it my personal covenant to never stop asking. I leaned forward slightly, and in a room that had gone very still, I said, "Mr. Reed, tell me why you did it." There was a silence after I asked the question, not the polite silence of a man considering his answer, a different kind of silence. The silence of someone who has been holding something in for a long time, and suddenly, unexpectedly, finds that the person they've been afraid of is actually asking to hear it. Marcus Reed stared at me. I could see him searching my face, the way you search a person's face when you are trying to determine if they are asking a question because they want the answer or because they are setting a trap. He did not find a trap. I have been told, by clerks, by bailiffs, by the cleaning staff who work late, that I have the kind of face that makes people decide to tell the truth. I don't know if that is true. What I do know is that Marcus Reed made a decision in that moment. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, and when he spoke, his voice came out smaller than I expected from a man of his build. Not weak, just contained. The way people speak when they are afraid that if they let the volume rise, the rest of the feeling will rise with it. "My wife fainted," he said. He stopped there, as if he had said something surprising to himself. I waited. "It was 11:30 at night," he continued, and his eyes dropped back to that point on the floor, but his voice stayed steady. "Lily, my daughter, she was already asleep. Diane went to the bathroom. I heard a sound. I went in and she was on the floor. She wasn't answering me." His fingers moved on the wooden stand, not fidgeting, just moving, as if the story required his hands to do something. "I tried to call an ambulance. They said 40 minutes. 40 minutes, Your Honor." He looked up at me then, and for the first time since he had walked in, there was something sharp in his expression. Not anger, urgency, still fresh, still living in him after all these weeks. I looked at her on that floor and I couldn't wait 40 minutes. I just couldn't. I nodded. Once. Not encouraging, just acknowledging that I had heard him. "Your license," I said quietly. "It was expired. I know that. I knew that when I got in the car." He exhaled hard through his nose. "I didn't have money for a cab. I had $17 in my account. The cab from my place to the hospital is $32. I had 17. The number hung in the air. $17. I had seen grown men weep over less and over more. Money has a way of translating human dignity into arithmetic, and $17 at 11:30 at night with your wife unconscious on a bathroom floor is not a number. It is a verdict already delivered. "The property," I said. He closed his eyes for a moment. "There's a storage facility. It has a gate. I know that place. I worked on a truck there 2 years ago. On the other side of that gate there's an exit that comes out 2 blocks from the hospital emergency entrance. If I went around, it was 9 blocks. It was 9 blocks, Your Honor." He opened his eyes and looked at me directly. "I forced the gate. I drove through. I was going to come back. I was going to explain. I was going to pay for whatever damage I caused. But the police stopped me before I got to the hospital. 2 blocks away. 2 blocks. 2 blocks. I thought about the specific geometry of that. How close he had gotten. How small the distance had been between where he was stopped and where his wife was waiting for him to arrive. "Did you make it?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I could hear the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Then he said, very quietly, "They told me later she was okay. She's here. She's sitting right there." He didn't point. He didn't need to. But I didn't know that. I sat in that station for 2 hours, Your Honor. 2 hours not knowing if she was alive, not knowing if she was dead, not knowing if my 3-year-old daughter had woken up in an empty apartment and found herself alone. His voice broke on the last word. Not dramatically, not performatively. It just broke. The way a person's voice breaks when the sentence they are speaking is too heavy for the structure that is trying to carry it. "Lily lost her grandmother last week," he said, and now the tears were there, finally. silently sliding down his face while he stood absolutely still. My mother. We told her Grandma went to heaven. She doesn't understand what that means exactly. She just knows it means Grandma is gone and isn't coming back. He wiped his face with the back of one hand. One quick, rough swipe, the way working men do, as if embarrassed to be seen doing it. This morning, he said, and stopped, swallowed. This morning when we brought her here, the lady from social services asked her to wait in the hallway. Diane told her Daddy was going to talk to an important man and that he'd be right back. And Lily, she looked at the lady and she asked. He couldn't finish. I finished for him, my voice quiet in the room. She asked if her daddy was going to heaven or jail. Marcus Reed nodded once, sharply, and a sound came out of him then. A single, choked exhale that was not quite a sob, but was closer to that than anything else I had heard in that room all morning. Behind him, in the first row, his wife had both hands pressed over her mouth. I put my glasses back on. I opened the folder. I picked up my pen, and I wrote the sentence while the room stayed so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Regarding the charge of driving with an expired license, the registration of the infraction will remain on record. The defendant is ordered to renew his license within 30 days. The court will cover the cost of renewal and associated fees through the County Worker Assistance Fund, for which the defendant qualifies. No additional fine will be assessed. I heard a sound from the back of the room, a caught breath. I continued writing. Regarding the charge of trespassing on private property, the court contacted the property owner prior to this hearing. Upon explanation of the circumstances, the owner has elected to withdraw the complaint. The security barrier sustained no structural damage requiring compensation. There is no charge to adjudicate. I set down the pen. I looked at Marcus Reed, who was standing at the stand with his mouth slightly open, as if he had forgotten how to close it. But before you leave today, Mr. Reed, I said, and I allowed myself the smallest smile. Not for the room, not for the record, but for the man standing in front of me with grease under his fingernails and tears still drying on his face. You are going to walk out into that hallway. You are going to kneel down to your daughter's height. You are going to look her in the eyes, and you are going to answer the question she asked this morning. You are going to tell her that Daddy is not going to heaven, and Daddy is not going to jail. You are going to tell her that Daddy is going home, and that Daddy is staying. Marcus Reed stared at me for 1 second. 2. Then he nodded, one firm, decisive nod, and I saw in his face the exact moment when the weight lifted. I picked up the gavel. Thud. Court is adjourned. I stayed on the bench for a few minutes after the room cleared. I often did that. The clerks knew not to hurry me. The bailiff knew to wait by the door without speaking. There was something about the courtroom in those first moments after an audience ended, when the voices were gone and the chairs were empty, and the marble floor held nothing but the memory of footsteps that I needed. Not for any procedural reason. Simply because the silence after a case like that one required a little time to settle, the way sediment needs time to sink to the bottom of a glass before the water runs clear again. I sat there and I thought about a hallway, about a child with a lopsided ponytail and a one-eyed rabbit, about the specific distance of 2 city blocks, and what they can mean when someone you love is on the other side of them. Then I stood up, straightened my robe, and walked out. He was there. I hadn't expected to see it. I wasn't looking for it. I was moving toward my chambers at the end of the corridor, the next file already forming in the back of my mind, the way the next file always did, because that is the nature of this work. There is always a next file, always another name, always another human being waiting to be seen. But the hallway made a slight curve before it reached my chamber's door. And as I came around that curve, I stopped. Marcus Reed was on his knees on the marble floor, not in the manner of defeat, Not crumpled, not collapsed. Deliberately, purposefully kneeling, one knee down, his large frame folded to bring himself level with a little girl in a faded pink dress who was standing in front of him with a stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest and her eyes very wide and very serious. I could not hear what he said to her. I was too far away, and he spoke quietly, the way fathers speak to small children when what they are saying matters, and they want to make sure the words land gently. I saw his mouth move. I saw his hands, those large, work-marked hands, reach up and rest on her small shoulders with the careful tenderness of someone handling something irreplaceable. I saw the moment she understood. Children that age understand in their bodies before they understand in their minds. Her shoulders dropped. Her grip on the rabbit loosened slightly, and then she leaned forward and pressed her face against her father's neck, and he wrapped both arms around her and held on with the quiet fierceness of a man who came within 2 city blocks of losing everything and knows now exactly what everything is worth. Diane Reed stood a few feet behind them, one hand over her heart, watching. I turned and walked the rest of the way to my chambers without looking back. Some moments are not meant to be witnessed any longer than the second they take to understand. That was a Monday in January. By the following April, Marcus Reed had renewed his driver's license, on time, on his own, without a reminder from the court. My clerk mentioned it when the confirmation came through the county system. She placed the document on my desk without comment, which was her way of telling me she thought it was worth noting. I agreed with her. Diane Reed's condition, severe anemia compounded by exhaustion, her doctors had concluded, was treated over the following months with iron supplementation, a reduced work schedule, and what I imagined was a husband who paid considerably more attention than he had before to whether she was sleeping and eating, and not quietly dismantling her health at 2 a.m. so the bills could get paid. I don't know this for certain. But I have been watching people for a long time, and I know what a man looks like when something has frightened him badly enough to change him. Marcus Reed had that look, the look of someone who has been shown in the most visceral and direct way possible what the alternative feels like, and who has decided without drama or announcement that he will not be visiting that alternative again. Lily Reed started kindergarten in September. I know this because Diane Reed sent a letter to the court, addressed to me personally, care of the clerk's office, approximately 8 months after the hearing. It was 2 pages long, handwritten on paper with a small floral border, the kind of paper you buy in a set from a drugstore and save for something important. She wrote about Marcus's license. She wrote about her health. She wrote about their daughter's first day of school. How Lily had insisted on carrying her one-eyed rabbit in her backpack because she decided Bunny needed to learn things too. She wrote about how hard the previous year had been and how close they had come. Not just that night, not just the hospital, but the entire year before it. The accumulation of small financial pressures and exhausted evenings, and the particular loneliness of working very hard and still feeling like the ground was shifting beneath your feet. And then she wrote one sentence that I have not forgotten. She wrote, "My daughter knows now that the courthouse is not a place where daddies disappear. Because of you, she knows it can be a place where they come home." I read that letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, where I keep the things I return to on the days when the work feels heaviest and the files feel endless, and I need to remember why any of it matters. It is still there. I have sat on this bench for 38 years. I have seen the law used as a hammer, and I have seen it used as a hand extended in the darkness. I have seen it crush people who were already broken, and I have seen it, on the right days with the right intention, give someone back something they thought was gone forever. What I know, after all of it, is this: the law is only as human as the person administering it. That is not a flaw in the system. That is the system's only hope. Marcus Reed did not walk into my courtroom that Monday morning as a criminal. He walked in as a father who had run out of options at 11:30 at night with $17 in his account and a woman he loved unconscious on a bathroom floor. The law saw an expired license and a forced gate. I saw a man who would have walked through fire to get to that hospital, and who was being punished for not having the specific kind of fire that costs $32 and arrives in 8 minutes. I chose to see the man. I will always choose to see the man.
Every single person who comes through those doors is carrying something the file doesn't mention: a history, a fear, a child waiting in a hallway with a one-eyed rabbit, asking a question that shouldn't have to be asked. The question of whether love is a crime. The question of whether desperation disqualifies you from mercy. In my courtroom, it does not. It never will. If this story stayed with you, if you heard something in it that sounded like someone you know, or someone you are, or someone you hope exists in a position of power somewhere in this world, then I ask you to do one thing before you leave.
Subscribe. Leave a comment telling me about a moment when someone chose to see you, really see you, instead of just the mistake you made. And share this with one person who needs to be reminded today that the world still contains people who ask why before they decide what you deserve. Because mercy is not weakness. Mercy is the bravest verdict a human being can deliver. Court is adjourned. If this story moves something inside you, I want you to pause for just a moment and ask yourself honestly, have you ever made a decision that looked wrong from the outside, but came entirely from love on the inside? Have you ever stood in front of someone with the power to define you and prayed they would choose to see you instead of just what you did? And have you ever been the person holding that power? The one who could have judged, who had every justification to judge, and chosen mercy instead? Because that is what this story was really about. Not a gate, not an expired license, not $4,000. It was about what happens when one human being decides that the why matters as much as the what. Tell us your story in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about compassion, second chances, and the kind of justice that actually looks like humanity, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We'll be here with another case, another name, another truth the file didn't mention. Court is adjourned.